Okay, so I'm then going to, with the standard kind of understanding of a traditional view of Jesus. Um, he claims to be the foretold one, or the people who believe in him also claim that he is the anointed one of the Jews. So Jesus is a fully Jewish man from the Middle East, ancient Palestine, Judea, Samaria location. Um, and there is a belief at the time, an anticipation for a Mashiach. A Mashiach in Hebrew means anointed. So the English word we have, Messiah, is our anglicized version of Mashiach. Now in Greek, the word equivalent is Christos, and we anglicize that into Christ. So the word Messiah and Christ mean the same thing. One's derived from the Greek and the other's derived from the Hebrew. And essentially, the belief was that so that's a title. Jesus would have been a common name, Yeshua. Um, but the title, Mashiach, Christos, that's a significant, a hoped for Redeemer of the Jews. Okay. Now, in the texts of the Christians itself, in the Gospels, Jesus is baptized by John the Baptist and claims to be God's son. Now, from the get-go, Christians are going to have debates, which we'll cover later. Excuse me, I have this cold. Of whether or not that implies he's God. And the nature of Jesus is going to be a hotly debated issue within the Christian world, all the way up even to now. But majority of Christians are going to take the consensus view that Jesus was actually God manifest in the flesh. Okay, we'll get to that more later. He was ethical, and he was in a spiritual revolution, not a military one. In this case, the reason why the majority of Jews, to point out, do not believe that Jesus was the Messiah. And keep in mind, even in Islam, in the Quran, Jesus is called Isa al-Masih, Jesus the Messiah. Okay? So Christians believe he was the Messiah, and Muslims believe he was the Messiah. Jews, who he came from, who he had a direct audience with, do not. Why do they not? The majority of Jews, have they not, and still do not believe he was the Messiah? Because the traditional idea of the Messiah was that he would be a military liberator, that he was not a pacifist to turn the other cheek and into some spiritual inner reform. The idea would be that he kick out the Romans. He should be a true liberator. And when he is nailed to the cross, and Islam has a little different take on that, and that's another topic for later as well, but when Jesus is crucified, while Christians say that that was the best thing he did for the world, right there, that's proof to the Jews that even if they were sympathetic with his message, hey, you didn't liberate us, you actually died, quite young, and you didn't get any political things accomplished, so you're not the one. You failed the litmus test. That's the issue that ends up happening, okay? Just to make that clear. Now, he does have, of course, a small following, but according to the scriptures itself that we have as our source, Jewish authorities were still offended by some of the things he was saying and the challenges he was making to their ideas. Now, the passages say that Roman authorities have him crucified as a criminal while he's in his 30s. And then the tradition is that Peter leads the community afterwards, okay? And his followers claim he was resurrected and became a heavenly savior. So I'm just kind of trying to break down some of the basic elements of the ideas of Christianity that are happening, okay? In the middle of that, well, I'll go one more level, and then I got to go back to Rome and put this in the context of Roman history as well. Saul or slash Paul of Tarsus is one of the most important thinkers in terms of the creation of Christianity when we talk about a base text. So first known as Saul, he was a Jewish Roman citizen. So he had Roman citizenship, and he was also important in the Jewish community. He originally, according to his own testimony, persecuted Christians and even had some killed. On his way to Damascus in Syria, around 31 to 32 CE, he claims to have a vision blinded from Christ in heaven. He admits he never met Jesus. So the dead Jesus in heaven, he claims, blinds him on a road, on a journey, and he converts to following Jesus, repents of his treatment of Christians, gets his sight back, and he changes his name to Paul. He taught that Jesus was the foretold Messiah and Christ of the Jews, that Jesus was the Son of God. Many argue that he taught that he was God. He died for human sins, so that crucifixion was actually a great thing for humanity. That's something that the Muslims are going to reject, and the Jews also, of course, reject. And he was the savior of all peoples, not just the Jews. So remember, the Jews believed in this covenant for them only. He really opens up the idea to the Gentiles, the idea that Christianity is truly universal. And he becomes one of the leading figures in the spread of Christianity and the church. Keep in mind, Jesus said, for example, very little about sexuality. Many of the arguments that a conservative Christian makes in regards to whether or not women should be allowed to serve as leaders of the church, the acceptance of homosexuality or not, or the debates about sex outside of marriage, the whole idea of sexuality is addressed in Paul's writings, not Jesus' writings. He says very little, almost nothing about sex, and he's very forgiving to prostitutes. He doesn't tell prostitutes they should be prostitutes. He just forgives them, and he lets them wipe his feet. And he says, he's against adultery. He believes in marriage, but he doesn't say much. In Romans chapter 1, 1 Corinthians 6, 9 and 10, I believe, are writings where Paul then makes condemnations, what appear to be homosexuality, adultery, and even he uses the word porneia, from where we get the word porn, which is vague, but maybe fornication, so on. So that's where his influence is on the ethics of, kind of core texts of Christianity, okay? Now, as far as Rome was concerned, they were normally quite tolerant of many religions, as we know studying Rome. And by 250 CE, there's maybe fewer than 10% in the Roman Empire. But the Roman authorities distrusted them. And part of it is because this loyalty to only one God and the refusal to pay homage to Roman emperors as gods offended the Romans. They were seen as extremely antisocial, to say the least. This was the problem for Romans. And so this tiny minority that appears to be generally pacifist in nature doesn't look much different than some of the other mystery cults that are around. That's not to say that they're influenced by those, but they should be blending in quite nicely into the Roman world. But I think it's this rejection of paying homage to the Roman emperors might be what's really getting them in trouble. Emperor Nero, he was considered quite psychopathic by anybody's standards. And several other emperors from 64 to 312 did persecute Christians, and quite horribly. Nero blamed a massive fire in Rome on Christians, And it's interesting. I haven't been able to enough research to find out exactly what really made the Christians, become on the radar in this way, other than what I just said. But we do know that these things are factually, happened. All right, so I'm going to end right there for a second, and we'll return to the next lecture.